Hello everyone and welcome to today's webcast. My name is Ben Frost. I'm the Public Information Officer for APA's Northern New England chapter and one of the coordinators of the Planning Webcast series. This series is brought to you by a consortium of over 40 of APA's chapters and divisions. The consortium itself is not affiliated with APA, but rather is a loose-knit association whose mission is to provide high-quality, free webinars on topics important to planners that will also help them to meet their certification maintenance requirements. Today is Friday, November 20th, 2015, and we'll hear the presentation, Revitalizing Florence, South Carolina's Downtown Neighborhoods. For technical help during today's webcast, type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, and I'll do my best to help you. If you have a serious technical question, though, you'd best call the 1-800 number shown on the screen. For content-related questions related to the presentation, please type those questions into the question box also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. We will answer those, if time allows, at the end of the presentation during the Q&A portion. On your screen now is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions. I want to thank all of the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible. Today's webcast is sponsored by the South Carolina chapter of APA. To learn more about all of the chapters, visit planning.org/chapters. And to learn more about divisions, visit planning.org/divisions. What you see now is the 2 remaining webinars we have for the year, both of them dealing with ethics. We're scheduling 2016 webinars, so if you have some great ideas for what we should be doing in the upcoming year, please give me a holler. To log CM credits for this webcast, you'll need to go to the APA website and log in, choose Activities by Provider, and type in South Carolina Chapter and select Revitalizing Florence, etc., etc. But note, you're not going to find it yet because CM is pending on this. We're resolving some technical issues with APA. You can like us on Facebook. We're listed under Planning Webcast Series, and that's perhaps the best way to get the most up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast series. We are recording today's session, and it will be available on our YouTube channel at this link. You can also just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. A PDF of today's PowerPoints will be available at the ohioplanning.org Planning Webcast webpage. Here are today's speakers, and I'm going to hand it over now to Kendra Cobbs. Kendra, I think
Good afternoon, everyone.
There you are.
Hey, this is Glenda Matute, and I will go ahead and give everyone some introductions of our speakers. We have 3 staff members from the City of Florence, and Jesse and myself from APD Urban Planning and Management, which is the consulting firm which helped the City of Florence with the neighborhood revitalization plan that we'll be discussing today. Our speakers are Kendra Cobbs. She is AICP and the Community Services Manager for the City of Florence. She has over 10 years of municipal planning experience in specialties within land use, zoning, neighborhood planning, and community development. She is currently the Community Services Manager for the City of Florence. Our second speaker today is Philip Lucadou. He is also AICP and the Director of Planning, Research, and Development for the City of Florence. He has over 22 years of planning experience, including working with small towns and cities, a regional planning agency, and in private development. He has served as a planning director for the City of Florence for 10 years. Our third speaker today is Scotty Davis. He has 17 years of senior management experience in local government, and he is currently the Director of General Services in the City of Florence. And in that position, he oversees and administers the contract compliance management of federal, state, and local grant funds. Our fourth speaker today is Jesse Wiles. He is the principal of APD Urban Planning and Management. He has over 20 years of experience as a leading consultant for urban and neighborhood redevelopment throughout the Southeast, particularly with a focus in disinvested urban neighborhoods. And I am AICP and the Urban Design Manager for APD Urban Planning and Management, and I have a background in urban planning and architecture. So just to give you a quick overview of what we'll be discussing today during the webinar, Philip will give you a project overview, some orientation to where the neighborhoods that we focused on are within the City of Florence and the context of demographics and existing conditions within the neighborhoods. Jesse and I will review with you guys and go over our planning process for the 3 neighborhoods within the City of Florence. And Scotty and Kendra will go over what current implementation efforts that are going on after the plan was completed. And the last part would be receiving questions from you guys. Philip, you can go ahead.
Okay. What I thought I would do is give a brief history of the I guess kind of the impetus for why we were started to look at neighborhood planning in the city at this particular time. And really that came out of a master plan that we did in 1998 called Florence 2010. The basic 2 premises of that plan said that we should look at, plan for, and revitalize our downtown, and then start to, in concert with that, start to plan for our neighborhoods and look at a revitalization plan for those. You fast forward to February of 2011 is when we actually wrote and adopted our comprehensive plan. And within the housing development or housing element of that plan, the premise there was to create a neighborhood-oriented planning program, and then also to look at neighborhood action plans. And then out of that, we got the idea, or the recommendation rather, out of the we conducted a neighborhood action plan, and we got the recommendation to write a full-blown neighborhood revitalization plan. Also in our comprehensive plan was the idea to promote infill development and redevelopment within our neighborhoods. So we hired APD, Urban Planning and Management, and then we comprised a team of city staff, residents, and stakeholders, and then also the consultant team. What you see in front of you now is a map of our neighborhood areas, and you have north, northwest, and east Florence. And then what you see in the center, kind of in the darker peach or pink color, see if I can, okay, so at the cursor, this is the downtown, and you see the proximity of the neighborhoods to downtown, so they are in very close proximity. So we're following our plans. And what you see is the north, northwest, and east Florence are our traditionally disenfranchised neighborhoods, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. Go ahead. As you see, the neighborhoods they comprise about 39% of Florence's population, which our population in the last census was at 38,000 plus or minus. And then we looked at structures and vacant lots, and 13.5% of the parcels contain either vacant lots or structures. And of those, 56% of the structures are in good or fair condition, and 16% are poor or deteriorated condition. We may talk about that in a little bit, but what we did is we sent some of our police officers out with GPS units to do an inventory of the condition of the structures, and then we were able to map that. The next slide. The neighborhoods are characterized by population loss between the two census, the city, while the city gained 15%, the neighborhood had a 7%. The neighborhoods also, just like many other disenfranchised neighborhoods, are characterized by poverty. We have an unemployment rate in the neighborhoods of double that of the overall city. And then if you see on the last bullet point, the median income is nearly half of what it is for the overall city. Another thing that I didn't mention is that the education is that we only had, in that area, there are only 11% have a bachelor's degree or higher. And then we also looked at owner-occupied housing, and there is a 55% rental occupancy rate in that area. So looking at our project timeline, we in 2012, we created or took on the Neighborhood Action Plan, which was a plan that was heavily engaged in citizen involvement. We had a kickoff meeting in our downtown. We had community meetings in each of the neighborhoods. And then we actually did bus tours because we felt like one of the things that we wanted to show was that residents in each of those neighborhoods had common issues. So in 2014, we started the neighborhood revitalization strategy, and that was adopted by council. We then began the implementation phase, and that is what is ongoing now. The revitalization team, as you see up here, is City of Florence, residents and community stakeholders, and consultant team. Community engagement, I spoke a little bit about with the Neighborhood Action Plan, and what we did is we used that action plan as a base for information, and we had additional community meetings, this time at key points in the process to gather information, again to discover and reinforce what the residents felt like were important issues. We set up as you do in many planning processes, we set up an advisory board, which is still active today throughout the implementation phase, and we met with that group to gain guidance in the direction in which we were going with the neighborhood revitalization strategy. Then we presented that plan at city council meetings and the neighborhoods, and as I stated earlier, it was adopted by city council. So up here you have the project goals, which were to stabilize, and really we were looking to provide a program for maintenance of the neighborhoods, capacity to provide sustainability and accountability of neighborhood revitalization initiative, and then we as part of the Neighborhood Action Plan, and I neglected to mention earlier, we actually established neighborhood liaisons, and that was members of staff who began to attend regularly the monthly meetings of the neighborhood groups, and then provide them with the ability to have a person that they could go to if they have any issues that are city related. We wanted to provide opportunities for affordable housing in both home ownership and rental, and we're looking to, and I think Jesse will discuss this in a little while, but really establishing a market so that individuals would have the opportunity to borrow money, to have comparables so that they could borrow money to purchase a home or renovate a home in the target areas. And we wanted to leverage resources. We have $3 million in initial seed money that's furnished by the city, and that would be used in locking federal, state, and private sector resources. We wanted to set up a governance structure for implementation, and then finally we were looking at demonstration areas, and those are what we'll talk about in a little while, called our catalytic projects. And then as a final goal would be to expand this process into other parts of the city.
So Jesse and I will go over the planning process that Philip described. to create the neighborhood revitalization strategy for the 3 neighborhoods. We started with our planning process consists of 3 specific steps. The first one is aggregating all of the existing conditions information for the neighborhoods, including any previous plans that were completed before the planning process started, as well as collecting demographic information for the neighborhoods. This information would then lead to an analysis phase where we would look at the market conditions within the neighborhoods and gearing towards finally or selecting specific areas for the demonstration projects that Philip was talking about. And the third step was to create implementation strategies for those specific areas and for stabilizing and revitalizing the communities. So that we followed that 3-step process throughout the planning of the plan for the revitalization of the 3 neighborhoods. So as I said, the first step was to aggregate all of the existing conditions within the neighborhoods. As Philip described, the police staff went out and collected existing conditions information on the parcel level. So that's what you see on the screen. They rated each parcel and each structure to collect current information of what is out there within the neighborhood. So you can see they did an analysis of from good to fair, or deteriorated or dilapidated conditions within the neighborhoods, and what is vacant lots, as well as anything under construction. Another example of the information we gathered was existing parks and assets within the neighborhoods, and looked at what areas were within a close proximity within those parks, as well as environmental constraints within the neighborhoods that we would have to consider when looking at areas to redevelop and to stabilize. So we collected all that information to then feed into what we call a decision-making process to select specific areas of a neighborhood to revitalize. What you're looking at in the screen is existing conditions in terms of crime within the neighborhood, so looking at where the hot spots are and where there's a lot of incidences of crime within the neighborhood. So once we collected that information, and we also reviewed any of the plans that were previously done, most importantly, as Philip mentioned, these neighborhoods are really close to downtown, so we also looked at the plans for downtown and how those would affect the neighborhoods. And once we've collected all that, had collected all that information, we moved towards the analysis phase, where we did a market analysis that Jesse will speak to in a little bit, of both residential and commercial market analysis that would help us understand what the neighborhoods could absorb in terms of new infill commercial as well as single family. And all of that information is fed into what we call a decision-making process, where we selected up 10 areas where we thought would good candidates for either stabilization or revitalization efforts within the neighborhoods, where we could demonstrate how concentrating efforts within the city and concentrating funding within the city you could create projects that would have a catalytic effect in the rest of the neighborhoods. And we use the slew of maps that you saw in the previous screen to kind of inform our decision-making process. So once we understood what was on the ground and what the existing conditions within the neighborhoods were, we determined that we would need to have 2 different initiatives within the neighborhoods, a stabilization initiative and a revitalization initiative. And the stabilization initiative is pretty much is focused on stabilizing existing structures and existing residents within the neighborhoods. Stabilization areas are primarily areas that have very little vacant lots or vacancy, so new infill single family would be more of a scattered approach. There would be a lot of candidates for restoration, so homes or structures that are in fair or poor condition. and the and also high homeownership rate. So we were looking at areas that have some homeownership with some scattered sites that we would need to create programs to stabilize these areas so that they would not continue to decline. So that those were areas that would be candidates for stabilization. And the second strategy that we came up with was a revitalization strategy, which is the opposite of a stabilization strategy. So it has a high vacancy and high number of vacant lots. There's a lot of structures within the areas that are dilapidated and deteriorated, which would make them ideal candidates for demolition. These areas would also have you want to look at areas that there's currently or future funding for projects. So infrastructure projects were coming along, or other investors were working in those areas. So you'd want to leverage the existing or future funding that would come into those areas. So pretty much a revitalization effort would be ideal areas where you could go in and pretty much introduce new infill projects that would where you'd attract new owners or residents into the neighborhoods. So we started in the decision-making process with 10 areas, as you see on the screen, that we had identified that could be good candidates based on their visibility or the existing conditions within those areas of the 3 neighborhoods, and we narrowed them down to 4 areas, 1 area within each one of the neighborhoods. And once we narrowed down the possible catalytic areas within the neighborhoods, we moved forward in the planning process with creating illustrative master plans that would show the vision of those projects, and that would show where specific programmatic elements would go in, either restorations or new infill single family, in some instances new commercial or retail, and where you could go in with a program, a homeowner rehab program or a rental rehab program, to bring some of the existing structures that needed some aid to bring those back to good condition. And the planning process also allowed us to look at the phasing of the projects based on market conditions, as well as doing some schematic budgets for each one of the projects to give the City of Florence an idea of how much financial commitment would be required for each one of the projects. Jesse?
I'm sorry. Let's start over again. One of the things that we tried to do in terms of this particular project area was to provide some reality to the likelihood of being successful as part of an implementation strategy, and so that was reflected in a market analysis. Simply, what we were trying to do was to understand if the City of Florence moved forward with a neighborhood revitalization initiative, what would be how would we position ourselves relative to the rest of the general Florence market, relative to housing, new infill construction, and even neighborhood retail. And one of the things that we were able to determine is that on the residential side, that there was a significant market opportunity for new homes within a reasonable price range in the target areas that we were looking for. Basically, there weren't enough new homes being built in these areas, our target neighborhoods, to absorb the market potential that we could work with. And the same thing for retail. Little retail had occurred in the area. There was a sufficient demand for more retail, and there was good likelihood that if we could develop the retail along some of the major corridors, that it would absorb enough market to be able to operate successfully. So the market analysis is a very important component. It helped kind of guide the number of units that could be built in a phase, what type of units that we would want to offer, what the price points would be, and even what some of the amenities would be as we begin to design homes. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, Glenda.
Hey, Jesse, it seems we've had some communications problems with Glenda.
Okay. Let me see if I can get that along. Okay, we had a quick power surge here, and apparently Linda lost power at her workstation. Kendra, is there any way that you could take controls of it?
Jesse, I would be able to do that, but I would need somebody to change the presenter on that end.
Kendra, I can do that for you.
Okay, thank you.
And for folks who are attending this is one of the pitfalls of technology. Sometimes with power surges, bad things happen. Go ahead, Kendra.
Yeah.
Okay, Jesse, I think this is the slide that you need.
Yeah, I've just completed market analysis.
Jesse?
Yes, I've just completed market analysis, so I need the next slide after that.
Yes, it's the implementation.
Yes. So market analysis is a slide that's on my screen. Maybe I.
No, we're seeing implementation strategy.
Okay. Well, I guess that mine froze at. You have to do it over, Glenda. Okay.
So Jesse, if you have a printout of your presentation,
yes, I do. I'm fine. I have a printout of it.
Okay.
Okay. So the slide that you see on your screen now is the implementation strategy, and part of the implementation strategy, it kind of describes the phases in which the project is intended to move. Linda talked a little bit about the stabilization strategies and what's intended there. The only thing that I would add to stabilization strategies is that one of the challenges that we typically have when we work in projects similar to this is that we want to make sure that we have a project opportunity that allows residents who live in the community to stay in the neighborhood. And so That is driven in part by the stabilization strategies. It's basically designed to keep work with families who are in the neighborhood, stabilize the neighborhood while the revitalization initiatives are being implemented. And so as we move from stabilization to revitalization, where we are now, and actually now in our work with Florence, is in our pre-development work, and specifically around land assembly. The strategy associated with land assembly, property acquisition and land assembly, is to acquire enough properties within these catalytic project areas and basically acquire properties that are adjacent to one another, blocks of properties that where significant change could be generated and evidenced through the redevelopment initiative, where it has a catalytic impact on the neighborhood in which the property acquisition is occurring. So as we do land assembly, we were looking at lot recombinations. We're working closely, in this case, with Philip and his staff relative to site planning and rezoning. We are now entering into a phase of our pre-development work where we're looking at house design and how to market and rebrand the neighborhood in which this redevelopment is occurring. And so the execution really is around, you know, the actual development of the property, positioning in ourselves in such a way where it has a significant impact on the neighborhood in which it's located, and then the financial modeling that Glenda mentioned earlier kind of gives the city some guidance as to what kind of financial incentives that we would need to put in place in order to incentivize both homeowners and builders and developers to come into the targeted neighborhoods for revitalization activities. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of the pre-development process and the governance structure, in this particular strategy, what we've asked the city of Florence to do is, on an interim basis, act as a master developer. And I would probably say that this whole notion of governance structure that we've asked the city to take on is probably the most unique and challenging aspect of this Florence neighborhood revitalization process. And it's simply built around the theory that at this stage of this neighborhood's life cycle, in terms of you know, being a more blighted, disinvested neighborhood, and us trying to move it from that current context to a neighborhood that's striving and flourishing, it is unlikely that we could attract major builders and developers into this neighborhood and to do it and to manage that revitalization in a way that's going to accomplish our objectives. So we asked the city to take on this role as a developer, if you will, and we're working with the city in terms of executing that. So that, as we mentioned earlier, we have a neighborhood advisory council that we're working with. Our project team involves both our staff as well as city staff, and we have constant input and communication with community members in terms of what we're doing. But the project management team has builders and developers that we'll be bringing in through a procurement process. We've already brought on architects and designers to help us with the design of homes and developments that will be occurring. We just launched our marketing and branding initiative, and we're working simultaneously with our human capital development, which is basically building the capacity of residents who live in the community. Next slide. So in terms of our pre-development processes and services that we're offering, this chart, I think, just kind of captures the way that we've set it up. Basically, we took a look at the various programs that the city already had in place so that we would not be introducing programs that were duplicating existing efforts. We tried to analyze what application would those programs have to various parts of our project area. And equally as important, we wanted to know, as a result of this neighborhood initiative, what kind of jobs would we be creating. Some of those jobs are can be managed by through existing opportunities. Some we may have to bring in outside help to help us with, and then from that we created a recommended plan of action to execute any and all of our pre-development services. So in terms of the roles and responsibilities, one of the next elements that we tried to look at was who's going to do the work, what would be the general responsibilities associated with them carrying out these various tasks, how would it line up in terms of a schedule, and what particular catalytic areas would it have application to. So as you can see on this slide, we have certain members of our project team that have responsibility for administration. Others have responsibility for information gathering, basically research. Others have responsibility for our land transfer. This is our property acquisition. This is actually managed in part by Kendra Cobb, who was a part of this presentation, and assisted by an outside realtor that helps us. We also looked at our site planning work, because a lot of the lots are either too small or need some level of recombination. We may also looking at various types of overlays that would make the introduction of new infill construction both compatible with the existing land use, and at the same time build upon it so that it's actually more homeowner or user friendly. It's a kind of an ongoing look at financing options and strategies, because in a lot of instances we're trying to finance and facilitate redevelopment in areas that really haven't seen that type of residential real estate development activity in 10, 15, 20 years, maybe even longer than that. So there's a whole education piece that we are trying to do with conventional lenders, as well as keeping the political body comfortable that we are managing public funds in a responsible way. And then, of course, it's this ongoing community involvement process, so that residents are always aware of what is going on in their community at any given time. Basically, just to try to manage their expectations, and at the same time make sure that they understand how this process is adding value and benefit to current residents, but not just something to attract new residents to the area.
Thank you, Jesse. So we're currently in the implementation phase of pre-development, and we have been for the last 7 months now. And within the past 7 months, we've been fortunate enough to acquire 14 properties, which is 33% of our willing seller database. And I'll go into more detail in order to describe our property acquisition process. With property acquisition, in order to acquire the 14 properties that we have been able to close on, we've followed this process that's up on the screen each time. So we start off with an authorization to purchase, and basically that's a form that has general information about the property, information like legal description, property owner, also the tax rate of the property, the tax value of the property, and this information is reviewed by city staff and it is signed off on by our city manager. So once we have that authorization to purchase, we then issue a letter to the property owner, and it's called a letter of interest. And basically the letter just gives a background of our neighborhood revitalization strategy, and it gauges the property owner's interest in selling their property to the city. And just to note, we haven't sought out any properties that aren't vacant and or dilapidated. So that is the focus of our property acquisition, properties that are currently vacant and or dilapidated, and just bringing that element of blight into the community. So once we have made contact with the property owner, and if they respond to our letter of interest and say that they would like to sell the property, they become a willing seller. And so with that willing seller, we are then able to go ahead and have the property appraised. And we only operate with an appraisal because that determines the fair market value of the property. And once we have the appraisal, we work with our real estate agent who works on negotiating a purchase price for the property, and hopefully we'll end up with a contract signed that we then forward to our city attorney in order to move that property into title review. A key element of our property acquisition process is using the interactive acquisition map. This is a tool that helps us to stay on task and also guide phase one of the implementation process. What you see up on the screen, basically the map is a GIS database of our project areas. So the blue area, the blue outline that you see up on the screen is our general project area, and then within that is the purple outline, which is phase one of property acquisition. So within phase one, we have properties that we've have detailed information on and that we've determined would be a good fit for land assembly. Also, what's really helpful with the acquisition map is that it has detailed information for each property. So we can select a property from the map and we'd be able to determine information about the property, like the size, the square footage of the lot, also the legal description, the address, the property owner, and we have images of each property. So if we select any of these lots within the purple outline, then we can pull up detailed information on the property, and we'd also be able to pull up an image of each property, which is very helpful when we have meetings and we're unable to get out to see a property. We can always rely on the acquisition map in order to pull up an image of the property. Another helpful tool that we use regularly is the weekly dashboard, and this is really used internally with the project management team that consists of APD, city staff, and our real estate agent. We use the dashboard, as you can see up on the table, in order to show the properties that we've been able to acquire overall and where they are in the process, whether it's a willing seller, if we have an executed contract, or if we're still waiting to hear back from the property owner based on that letter of interest that was issued or that went out to the property owner. And then also for not just the overall general information, it breaks it down into further detail, showing the process or the progress that we have in each of the areas. So you see Pine, Sumter, Alexander, and Vista Streets, and right now those are corridors within the project area that we're focused on, and so it shows how many contracts we've executed on each corridor, which coincides with each project area. Once we've acquired properties, with these 14 properties that we've acquired, it's necessary to make sure that we maintain the properties. We have ongoing property maintenance, and this is done through city staff. We have a public works department that we rely heavily on, and also community services. We have staff that is constantly out in the community, in the neighborhoods, and also we have a codes enforcement division, and they're like our eyes and ears in the neighborhood. So we have all city staff that helps us to maintain each property that we acquire. And maintenance consists of just making sure that the homes, if there's a structure on the property, making sure that the structure is secured so that there aren't any vagrants that are able to access the home or the property. We make sure that there aren't any overgrown lots, and also if there's an accumulation of any trash or debris, we make sure that we clean that up, because we don't ever want to be seen as violating any of the codes for the city. So we are regularly in the neighborhoods in order to make sure the properties that we acquire, as well as other properties as well, but specifically the properties that the city acquires, we're making sure that they remain maintained. The early part of 2015, the city was fortunate enough to be awarded $571,000 through the state, through a program called the Neighborhood Initiative Program. And this is funding that we're able to leverage with that $3 million, and it helps to eliminate, it further helps to eliminate the blighted properties within these neighborhoods. So we're able to leverage these funds in order to demolish dilapidated homes and to help stabilize the property values and prevent foreclosures for existing homeowners. So the city has identified 17 houses that meet the criteria of being blighted, and the focus is to also make sure that initially they are in these project areas that we've been discussing. So we've identified these 17 houses, and with this funding we're able to purchase these properties and then move forward to demolish the dilapidated structure, and then also clear and green the lot. The city of Florence has a police force of specialized officers called the Community Action Team, and their focus is on the neighborhoods within the city. So they have a very high presence in the neighborhoods by attending neighborhood association meetings, organizing neighborhood cleanups. They attend other neighborhood events, and they also work with the youth in order to help develop programming that will keep the youth occupied and active in positive activities. So the overall goal of the Community Action Team officers is to develop and maintain that close relationship or tie with the neighborhood residents, so that we increase the level of trust between the police officers and the neighborhood residents. So this is another way that we also maintain the properties and make sure that there aren't any code violations that would develop over time with these properties that we've acquired. When the city initially started talking about neighborhood planning and developing a plan and strategy for neighborhood planning in the city, we wanted to develop ways in order to help build community within the neighborhoods. So what the city was able to plan out was a community gardening program. And so we wanted to do that in order to, like I said, help build community and also help beautify these areas. And it's also a way to heighten awareness of healthy eating. So with developing this program, city staff worked with community volunteers and residents in order to start gardens within the different neighborhoods, which are also in our target neighborhoods that we've been discussing. City staff designed each of the garden layouts, and also our public works department built and installed raised planter beds, and also led the charge in getting the water connections to these different sites. And at that point, the gardens were turned over to the community residents in order to adopt the plots and plant either flowers or fruits and vegetables. And so the onus was placed back on the residents. We started this community gardening program in 2014, and we now have 5 community gardens throughout the different neighborhoods that the residents continue to maintain.
Earlier this year, the City of Florence received about $700,000 from the South Carolina Community Loan Fund. These funds will be used to develop 7 homes in the area. 2 of these homes will be restored. We're looking at using these funds exclusively in our minority communities with minority contractors. We'll use these funds as financing, again, to build these 7 homes. The homes will range from 1,400 to 1,600 square feet, and we estimate a construction cost of between $140,000 and $160,000. We certainly understand that we will have to overbuild these homes relative to the existing houses in the neighborhoods. We are trying to attract new homeowners in those areas. We will, however, keep those housing units affordable with layered financing, so they will be affordable housing. They won't be cheap housing, but they will be affordable relative to our layered financing. We will look at allowing people to purchase these homes that are at the 80% area median income. The homes will be 1- and 2-story, as seen in the pictures, complete with garages. We'll probably have high-end finishes, anywhere from 3-tab architectural shingles, high-end flooring, granite countertops, all designed to enhance the community and entice others to come into this area. You look at our design, our timeline. We started our design process in early September, again looking at what would make someone come and build in these areas, looking at a house plan, and particularly looking at housing choice, so that those that are accustomed to buying in other parts of town will now give us a second look, because our product would be as good, if not better, than any product relative to the same price point in Florence. Again, these houses will be 1- and 2-story. We'll have garages. We understand our target market is generally going to be single females. About 80% of those target market will be single females, particularly minority females in these neighborhoods. We're building next to a school, $25 million school. So we wanted to take all that in consideration as we design those houses, looking at the lighting, looking at safety features in those areas that would complement that area. We are looking at land assembly for the next 6 months or so. Kendra talked extensively about that. City staff has worked diligently in that. We have had some hurdles. We're looking at tax properties. We've had a lot of title issues. We have some, dare I say, price gouging or attempts at price gouging. All of these are issues that we've had to work with and through. These houses or these areas hadn't had a lot of turnover in land and redevelopment in those areas. We have a lot of family land, a lot of air property that we've been dealing with. Again, we have been successful with 14 of those units out of 50. We're looking at about 50 properties that we would like to purchase in this first phase, and we've started with 14. Our procurement process, we're going to do an RFQ with builders. We want to make sure that we get builders who are accustomed to building higher-end units in this price range. We certainly will open it up to smaller builders. We'll be looking at trying to use people in the neighborhoods, trying to certainly use local personnel to do that. We will be working and selecting and have a selection process, and it won't necessarily be low bid. We will design the plans and we will put those plans out to bid, and we will work with builders and provide some incentives if needed, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. As we start our construction process for the housing, we certainly understand we have to address the infrastructure in the area. These are some streetscapes that we will be looking at doing. We want to look at the functionality of those streets. We're certainly designing those, looking at lighting, and make sure that we have a complete street product there. These are two main streets or main thoroughfares in our targeted neighborhoods. Again, the Vista Street project is immediately adjacent to a $25 million newly constructed middle school. We will be building directly across the street there. We certainly understand that we need to enhance that street for safety features, for functionality. There we're looking at, as you see, bike lanes, sidewalks, decorative lighting in these areas. This is a part of a larger process that we're looking at, about $5 million streetscape projects in these areas that are specifically will be set aside for our neighborhoods. As we move along to our next steps, we had to develop the tools for rehabilitation or redevelopment of these areas. And so now we're working on some policies that will allow us to complete this project on the homeowner side. We're looking at revitalization and stabilization. Our revitalization tools will look at single-family mortgage assistance programs. We're also looking at rental rehab programs, owner-occupied loans. All of these tools will assist us. In our single-family mortgage program, we're looking at approximately 20% down payments. Owner-occupied rehabs, we'll looking at about $30,000. So we would work with existing homeowners in those areas to the tune of about $30,000 to bring their houses up to code and beautify those areas. Our residential and retail facade loans will be in the neighborhood of approximately $15,000. Our rental rehab loans are about approximately $30,000. We will work with the owners of those, and we will require that the owners of these rental units put up some funding, and so they'll have skin in the game. And again, that will speak to our stabilization strategy on our rehab loans. Our developers will have some loans for builders and developers, and we'll look at our $700,000 that Kendra spoke of earlier there, to use those funds to allow developers and builders to come into our program. We certainly understand that we may have to negotiate with developers, and we're willing to do that. We're willing to make offers of anything from paying the construction finances to offering purchase guarantees to builders. We certainly are thinking outside the box, and we're trying to attract the best and the brightest builders and developers to this project. We certainly understand that we have to have an aggressive marketing and branding campaign. Through APD, we've been able to secure the services of an executive marketing professional that has years of experience in marketing with major Fortune 100 companies. So we're very proud of that fact. We certainly understand that in order to deal with the banks, we have to work with them to reduce their exposure and minimize their risk. So we will have a very aggressive marketing and branding campaign. When we spoke with the neighborhoods personnel, the thing that we left with was we certainly was told about the history of those neighborhoods. We had to appreciate and understand the history of those neighborhoods and understand the assets, and we've developed plans of the assets in those areas, and we're going to use those assets as our marketing piece. That will be the centerpiece or the focus of our marketing campaign. Here are all the good things in these neighborhoods. Here are the things you didn't know about these neighborhoods. We have a lot of firsts in those areas. These neighborhoods of North Florence, East Florence, and West Florence are obviously historic African American communities. We have a number of first African American doctors, lawyers, and educators in Florence that have lived or continue to live in these areas. And again, we've highlighted all of those assets in those areas. We were trying to restore hope. The neighborhoods are very proud. They have a proud, rich histories. But along the way, they lost a little bit of hope, and we're trying to restore that hope. And certainly by adding to the infrastructure and the housing choice in those neighborhoods, we're able to restore that hope. As Philip talked about earlier, there's about anywhere from 55 to 70% rental rate in these areas. We're trying to significantly increase the home ownership rate in these areas. We've done the neighborhoods tours. We've tried to identify and address issues early on in this area. We've been working on this for several years now, but in the last 3 years, we've really made a concerted effort to address those ills in the area. And again, I think the big piece of the marketing and branding is the hiring of our experienced marketeer that's been working with Fortune 500 and 100 companies for several years. So we really want to throw the whole kitchen sink at our marketing and branding campaign. On our boards that we've created, we have the home builders, president of the Home Builders Association. We have business and civic leaders. We also have people working in our educational institutions. We have developers, we have architects, we have community leaders. We really have a bang-up team in regards to our marketing and branding team. We didn't leave out the community. We also have a number of people from the community on our marketing and branding team. We understand that the people who live in these areas can tell their story better than anyone else. And we're certainly listening to those stories, and we're rallying behind that, and we're working with them to lead the charge to change these neighborhoods. And with that, I'm done. Questions?
Wow, this is a really inspiring story. I'm so impressed with what you've done in Florence and continue to do. We do have a bunch of questions. In addition to the questions that I have, I've been writing furiously as you all have been talking. But let's start with some questions from our audience. This is a question from Karen. How many staff were dedicated to as neighborhood liaisons?
We had 3 staff members initially that have been working in the neighborhoods and continue to work in the neighborhoods. And with the staff members, that means we're committed to going to the neighborhood association meetings and participating in the neighborhood events, like I mentioned, with the community action team.
Karen also asked, and I was wondering about this too, and I think it was Philip who was talking about the role of the CAT team, the community action team, the police department, and I think it was Philip who said that they were out doing the windshield or walk-by surveys of properties. which kind of struck me too, and wondering what was the level of engagement of, say, the planning or consulting staff with the police department and police officers in teaching them how to do this?
Well, basically what we did is Glenda and Jesse and those developed a rating system for the condition of the houses, and then we took our GPS units and we have a local GIS technician or analyst on our staff, and our engineering staff took our GPS units and calibrated them to where the police officers, when they went to a site, they were able to pinpoint the site using GPS. Then they had on that unit a drop-down menu, and they were able to rate those structures based on the criteria that was generated and given by APD. And then also in that, with that unit, they then took a photograph of the structure, and so tagged to that PIN number or ID number for each parcel. We were able to then we can select the parcel, bring up a field, and it shows a photograph of the structure. Then it shows the rating, and we did some QC on that, but that's generally how we accomplish that feat.
Well, that's great, because in my experience, police departments have had little or nothing to want to do with building code enforcement and the like. So congratulations to you on that. Get a question from Krishna. Is there a correlation or a connection between the implementation of this plan in Florence and the city's capital improvement program or plan?
I would say, and Scotty may want to chime in on this, as far as capital improvement, I don't think there's really a tie into our specific capital improvement plan. What we do have is the county adopted a 1 penny sales tax that has a sunset clause, and what we chose to use in our allocation of that money was for road improvements. We're doing streetscaping, intersection improvement, road widening, and corridor enhancement in target areas within these neighborhoods.
Well, and in your response, you answered a question that I had, because on one of the first maps you had up on the screen was listed the penny sales tax project, and I was wondering what that was. So that makes a lot of sense now. Question from Bruce. He's asking if there is any connection that you have with Habitat for Humanity, a local chapter, which might help to rehab or reconstruct properties.
We've been working with Habitat for Humanity for several years. We aren't working directly with them on this project, but we actually created a subdivision for them 20 years ago, and most recently we've been successful in receiving funding through our neighborhood revitalization strategy. Through the state of South Carolina, we received about $1.2 million, and we donated $400,000 for them to purchase foreclosed properties and redevelop those foreclosed properties. That's actually a little bit separate from this project. So we are working with them, but not necessarily in this project.
Interesting. Question from June. Is there a follow-up strategy after the homes were sold in regards to home and yard upkeep? She observes that often once the property was revitalized and sold, the house and property goes into disrepair again. Have you seen that?
Well, we haven't. We haven't built our first house in this project yet. In other projects, when we built houses, we also do pre and post home ownership counseling. This project will have pre and post home ownership counseling, mandatory pre and post home ownership counseling. And under post home ownership counseling, we work with the homeowners with that about keeping the house, maintaining the yard, and we'll also work with our code enforcement department to ensure that that occurs.
I have a question, and this is related to a question that asked by one of our attendees, and it has to do, Barbara asks, why did you decide to begin building higher-end houses instead of more modest houses? I observed that one of you, perhaps it was Scotty, was talking about granite countertops.
Yes. When we did our marketing study, and Jesse may want to chime in on the marketing piece, we found that the areas had a number of modest homes. The choices for home, the housing choice was not there for the upper end units, and that's relative speaking to Florence and these areas. Again, we're talking about the 140, 160 range. We wanted to build a product so that those that wanted that choice would have that choice. The modest homes are there. The $70,000, $80,000, $50,000 homes are prevalent throughout the community, but we found that the homeowners in those areas or property owners that's living in those areas had the disposable income or discretionary income to purchase higher end units, but there is a lack or deficiency in those housing choices. And so that's, again, it speaks to marketing, and it speaks to trying to tap in that untapped market.
This is Jesse. I would add to, just reiterate what Scotty is saying, that when we did our series of public meetings, one of the most consistent feedbacks that we got from residents and community stakeholders was that they wanted the revitalization to facilitate them having a mixed income neighborhood, which is what these neighborhoods, which is where you probably could describe these neighborhoods 20 or 30 years ago. And so when we hear that comment coming from residents, basically it really suggests that in order to attract moderate and middle income families into neighborhoods that experienced some blight and disinvestment, that your product has to be equal to or superior to what they can find in other neighborhoods that they may want to live in. So when we had that discussion with Philip and Scotty and Kendra, what that essentially means is that we have to build a very good product, even though we may not be able to price it as such at the early stages of this development. And so that's what we have set out to do, is to build a good product that's going to be priced moderately, but we're going to build a range of products that are priced moderately, and then as the project matures, some of them may be priced a little higher to attract a more moderate and middle income market into it. But we will always have a price point that would be attractive to first-time home buyers or home buyers who have modest income. But the curb appeal of the property, in other words, what you would see from the street, will not reflect the fact that it could be that it's priced moderately, and that's kind of the key, if you will, to being able to develop these neighborhoods out as mixed income neighborhoods, is that not being able to differentiate between where families whose incomes may be lower live versus the families whose incomes would be that are a little bit higher may live.
Do you have a concern that you might actually wind up being too successful, and that is, I'm thinking about the existing residents of the area and the possibility that if there is a lot of, say, strong purchase market activity, will they get pushed out?
Well, that's a concern, but the way that we manage that concern is described in the two-pronged strategy that Linda mentioned in one of the earlier slides, and that is the parallel to the, this land assembly, home design, home building activity is a stabilization activity, and that stabilization activity is directed primarily toward existing residents who currently live in the community, and so that particular strategy is engaged at a number of levels. One is just the whole capacity building level. In other words, strengthening community organizations, building on existing assets, and making sure people understand the value of the location in which they live. And the other is around, especially with the homeowners, is homeowner stability, and where we are designing a program that would encourage homeowners to invest in their current homes and provide them with a financial resource that would allow them to do that in a comfortable manner. So, you know, it's not exclusively a strategy where we're simply trying to attract people into the community and build nice product, but it's also a strategy that runs parallel with that works with the existing residents who live in the community.
Great, thank you. Another question: what, if any, financing or funding programs have been developed to encourage private sector activity to build in these neighborhoods?
Scotty, you spoke to that a moment ago. Scotty spoke to that a moment ago in terms of how you're looking to leverage private sector funding. Generally, what we are looking to do is that the initial construction funding that a lender would need to bring to the table, a builder would need to bring to the table, would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 75% of the overall construction cost, and the city will fund the other 20 to 30% of the construction cost. So that's basically, you know, and then the city may be asked to fund the construction interest during the period in which the home is built for up to a year. So, you know, we're looking basically at ways to mitigate risk associated with bringing private capital into this particular market by, you know, by providing some of the equity on the construction loan side, and some of the down payment and closing cost assistance, which could be up to 30% of the overall mortgage amount for the homeowner.
Great, thank you. Kendra, I've got a question for you. You had talked about the function of the City of Florence as a purchaser of property, as you're identifying properties that were appropriate for acquisition and redevelopment, as it were. And I'm wondering, what were the politics involved in getting the City Council to agree to take on this function?
Well, we've had this neighborhood planning process that's been going on for about 3 to 4 years now. So this is not something that is new. And with that, the residents have been involved along the way. We've had a great deal of resident support and community meetings. And so the plan, the neighborhood action plan and the neighborhood revitalization strategy are a result of the residents' desires and what they deem to be important in moving forward in order to revitalize these areas. And so that's what's been communicated to City Council over time, and that is what has helped to have this $3 million appropriated to neighborhood revitalization. So the strategy that we've adopted and we're now working from, City Council approved or adopted that strategy in December of 2014. So all of that, I said all of that to get to the point of we're able to be successful in order to acquire properties, and even the 14 properties that we have acquired, and acquire more properties, because this is the feedback that we're getting from the community, and the City Council is listening. Therefore, that's how we're able to have that $3 million appropriated and move forward with acquiring the land assemblage.
Great. And throughout the presentations that you've all done, I noted there's a really strong emphasis on on community engagement, not just outreach, but actual active engagement with people of the neighborhoods. So my question is, how were the neighborhood advisory meetings assembled? How did people get to be part of that group?
Are you you're, I guess, referring to the neighborhood advisory board?
Yes.
Okay. When we generated the I guess the population, for lack of a better term, for that group, there were members, I guess, recognized leaders of each of the neighborhoods that were invited to be on that team. We also brought in individuals that represented other sectors of the community, i.e. banking community. One of the larger influences in Florence is a large hospital system, McLeod Health, and we have representation from that from that hospital on our board. We brought in developers, real estate agents, builders, so that we had a representation of a broad spectrum, not only of the neighborhoods, but also of the development community and every aspect of the development community.
And I think it's important also to note that we intentionally invited a few naysayers and put them on that group to make sure that we had a strong product. And fortunately, we've turned those naysayers now into our biggest advocates.
It's funny how that happens. I'm glad to hear you did that. Question about the budgeting of this program. Can you give an approximate breakdown of how, what percentages of funding went to different functions, including, in particular, and this is a question from Holly, marketing. What proportion of the budget have you spent on marketing?
Well, that's actually, we have that built into our contract with APD. I don't know exactly how much we've expended in that line item, but we've contracted with Jesse Wiles and his group, and a lot of those pieces he's been able to bring, or he has his firm that has those professionals in them. And we're paying them a lump sum, and we've been working with them in various stages for about 2 to 3 years now.
And it's also, I'm sorry, Ben, I just want to chime in with that. We're just moving into the marketing and branding piece. So right now we're still in the property acquisition phase, and we actually have just started discussions with our neighborhood advisory board on marketing within marketing the neighborhoods. So marketing is something that probably won't really get off the ground until the early part of next year.
So this is Jesse Wiles. So what Kendra and Scotty have said is exactly right. So, for the person who asked this question, this is kind of how this plays out. Well, let me back up for a second. I'd say 99% of the monies that are going into this overall initiative is from the city's general fund budget, which, this, in terms of the type of work that we do nationally, this is very, very important, I think, because a lot of cities will try to do this type of work with block grant money and home money, and it's just very difficult to do. It's hard to do at any scale. That has become, over the years, a very unpredictable source of funding, and then it has a lot of restrictions in addition to that. So, that part, I think, is significant when we start talking about budget and the budget allocation. So really the city has set aside, money from their general fund budget to do this initiative: land acquisition, our fees, the construction costs, the development subsidies that we talked about. So in terms of the marketing and advertising, as Scotty said, that was built into our fee structure for the project to facilitate that happening. The way that we're going to be able to manage costs relative to marketing and budgeting is that the idea is that our staff will actually train this committee to be champions for marketing and branding for the city of Florence. And so that significantly reduces the cost, whereas in other cities we worked in, our staff took on the whole responsibility of marketing and branding, and quite frankly, it can get a little bit expensive. But here, we're actually training a group of committed stakeholders to learn and understand how to market, brand, and become champions for the neighborhoods in which we're working. The city will then take on responsibility for things like, getting a website up and running, maintaining that website, the collateral material associated with marketing and branding a neighborhood. But the more expensive elements, like having a highly paid professional on retainer to manage all the marketing and branding activities, will actually be managed by this advisory committee, and our firm, will primarily act as a coach to this group, and then eventually just work ourselves out of a job in terms of giving them direction.
I think that's a great approach. So many projects, otherwise good projects, die for failure to properly figure out how to communicate with the public and people who will be affected by it.
Exactly.
A question and I think it was Scotty who was talking about this. This is a question about the home purchases, and I think you mentioned that there was a 20% down payment requirement, which seems in current market terms seems like a very high down payment requirement. Most mortgages don't require more than 5%. Do you anticipate that this may be a barrier for some purchasers?
No, I didn't necessarily say there would be a 20% requirement. What I was suggesting is that the city would provide 20% of the total project cost as the housing cost as down payment assistance.
Okay, that makes a whole lot more sense. That makes a lot more sense, especially with much tighter mortgage requirements that people are facing these days. Yeah. We have a comment that I want to read to you because I think it made me smile when I saw it. Good program and well organized. Would like to hear about its success in about 5 years from now, and so please keep track of progress and metrics in the interim. How are you going to be measuring success?
We certainly, as Kendra, I think, mentioned earlier in her presentation, we have our tabletops. We have a certain number of housing units that we will build over time. I think we're anticipating to build 7 by July. So we'll be measuring it by what we do, by the products that we produce, and we'll certainly want to make sure that the homeowners remain in those homes. We've been doing housing in the city of Florence, affordable housing, for several years now, and we've been relatively successful in that, and ensuring that the homeowners that we place in those homes actually stay in those homes. Several years ago, when the normal foreclosure rate was hovering around 10 or 11%, we were at around 1% with fairly risky homeowners, and we certainly hope that we'll stay in that, have a foreclosure rate of no more than 1%, and we would immediately try to ensure that a new homeowner is in that home if we ever have that foreclosure rate. So I think, again, we'll measure our success by the number of products that we build and the number of tenants or homeowners that we place in those units on a yearly basis.
And I wanted to add to that also, a good measure would be the demographics that might change in the neighborhood. So when Philip was given his portion of the presentation and mentioned that, the project area has lost 7% of its population between 2000 and 2013, a good measure of how successful our neighborhood revitalization is that we're actually, rather than losing population in these neighborhoods, we're gaining population, and it will stay in line with, you know, the percentage of population that's gained within the city limits overall. And then also the unemployment rate, you know, that would be another measure in order to determine how successful we are in actually revitalizing neighborhoods.
And one other metric that I guess I would like to add is that ability for a homeowner or a potential homeowner to be able to go into these neighborhoods and secure a loan or secure a loan to renovate their existing house based on comparables that are in the neighborhoods. And so therefore we have been successful in creating a market where individuals can choose to move back to these neighborhoods.
So here's how that actually will play out. All of the above that you heard from Scotty and Kendra and Philip, and we actually started this conversation several months ago and had it as recently as Tuesday or Wednesday. We'll work with the city to develop a dashboard, and that dashboard will, you know, look at the total amount of funding into the project and any of the other funding sources. But then it will start measuring things like total direct investment, the impact on the local economy, you know, what kind of increase are we able to generate in terms of the tax base, and the other metrics would be things that have been mentioned. How many lots have we bought, or parcels have we bought? How many parcels have we developed? How many parcels have we sold? What's the standing inventory? In addition to the items that Scotty and Kendra and Philip mentioned. So, you know, we just kind of know from our previous experience that you know, the policymakers as well as the city staff are looking for a way to measure the impact that this redevelopment initiative is going to have. So this is a metric that we use in some other cities, and we just kind of tailor it to the types of assessments that our local government clients would like to have, and then we just provide that information to them on a monthly basis.
Great, and with that, we have a call for the 5 of you to present at the 2020 National Planning Conference. So in the interim, best of luck to you. We are at the end of our time for this webcast. I want to thank all of our presenters today. This is a really fascinating program, and we look forward to great success and for your story in the future. Thanks again very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.